I think from the outset, I've probably come across as one of the happiest, friendliest and most normal people you could possibly meet. But truthfully, I'm fighting a battle every single day. I'm struggling severely, and I have been for many years. My life and my mind is totally controlled and consumed by intrusive negative thoughts in the form of OCD. As a kid, I was frightened of dying. I was frightened of losing people. But truthfully now, I'm terrified to live. I actually remember my first ever moment when I knew that I was slightly different, and it was when I was 6 years old. I was over on holiday in Mallorca with my family, and we'd just been out for a meal. I walked past the lamppost and I brushed the lamppost and I touched it with my right hand, and it was about 50 metres to 100 metres down the road. I just all of a sudden was hit with this overwhelming fear that I had to go back and touch that lamppost again. And I felt like if I didn't do it, that my whole family were going to die. I had no idea what was going on, but I ran back to the lamppost as fast as I could and I touched it. And I saved everyone's life. I genuinely believe that I actually saved their lives. But little did I know that was the start of something that was going to manifest into something quite terrible as life went on. As I kind of grew a little bit older, probably a couple of years later, I remember watching a film on monsters. I had this fear that there was monsters in my cupboard. And every night I used to go to bed and I used to check my wardrobes to check that there was no monsters in there. And it started off normal. I'd check my wardrobes once, and I'd walk around my room and there'd be 2 wardrobes, a chest, and I'd check behind the curtains, then I'd get into bed. But as time went on, I started to make mistakes. And every mistake I make would build a further ritual into the day after. It didn't so much as affect my childhood because I was so lucky growing up. I had everything I needed, but it was so frustrating. And my mum and dad would always question it the next day. I'd come downstairs and they'd always ask me what I was doing, and I couldn't tell them. I just said, I really don't know. I've just got to do it, and that's how it went on from there. So as I kind of got older and into my early teens, these rituals did continue. I was always checking my wardrobe. I was stepping on grates and going back and stepping on grates just to save lives, and it was a strange way of living. But it wasn't. I want to be clear that it wasn't something that at that stage of my life was affecting my life in a really negative way, because I had absolutely everything, and I was so lucky growing up, and I had great friends, and my family were just unbelievable. And I think that's why when I got to a little bit older, it all became very difficult, because it was at around 21 years old that my whole life came crashing down. And then I'd been on a night out and we were around at a friend's house, and one of the lads was talking to the other lad about how the fact he'd seen him cheat on his partner. And all of a sudden I was just flushed with this anxiety and fear that imagine if I'd done something and not realised I'd done it. Imagine if I'd been on a night out and cheated on my partner at the time and I didn't realise I'd done it. So for the next kind of couple of months I was going over every single night out that I'd ever been on throughout that two-year relationship, and I could never hurt anyone. I could never let someone down. I'd never cheat. I despised anything unlawful. But my mind was all of a sudden trying to convince me that I was capable of doing these things. And it started off with cheating. But as time went on, it started to come into effect for absolutely everything. You know, anything that you can think of that you absolutely hate, my mind was telling me day in, day out that I could be that person. I could have done that. And I might have a thought of pushing somebody, but then all of a sudden I'd be flushed with anxiety. I'd be struggling with the actual thought of it, and it'd make me almost believe that I had actually done it. And then for months on end, I'd not be able to let go of the thought, and for up to 3 months I might live as if I'd actually hurt someone, as if I'd actually murdered someone and pushed someone in front of a train. And the thought would just replay and replay in my head, causing me severe anxiety, and depression was always just around the corner. It got to a stage where, you know, back in the day, I was the person who started everything, the parties, and got everyone round and brought everyone together. And I'd gone from being that person to being a hermit. I deleted everybody off Facebook. I cut all ties with my friends. I couldn't leave the house. I couldn't do anything. I couldn't even live a normal life anymore. And I'd totally disappeared off the face of the earth, and I didn't really see any way out. After about a year of dealing with this and trying to manage the way I was feeling, very much alone. I mean, obviously I had the great family support, but I couldn't really talk about how I was feeling because the thoughts I was having were, well, too scary to even talk about. And I made a decision to run away, and I left the relationship I was in, and I moved over to Spain, and I was on my own over there. I had friends. I'd made friends at work, and it got to a stage I was doing all the wrong things. I started to drink excessively just to numb the pain, and thankfully I met up with a friend over there who'd moved over at the same time as me, and his partner had moved out with him, and she was a psychiatrist, and she worked in the hospital. We sat down, and she spent about a minute of listening to me, and she just said, "You've got OCD." And I was just like, no, this isn't OCD. It's not doing things in order. It's not lining things up. It's not the things I was going through as a kid. This is intrusive thoughts. It's intrusive negative images. It's rumination. And she was like, yeah, you've just got it in a different format, which is very often a million times worse. And that for me was like, wow. So I knew then what was wrong with me, but up until that point, it was almost impossible to understand or even know what OCD was, because growing up for me, I grew up in an age where it was very much generalised and trivialised in the media, and there was this whole media misconception of what OCD actually was. You know, it was, you know, for me, I was living this life and I was debilitated. It was debilitating, and I couldn't live or barely even function. For years I was stuck in this cycle, and up to around 4 years ago, I had to document my every move, and I was grateful at the time for the iPhone notes, but looking back, it was pretty much a catalyst, and it really fueled my OCD, because using the iPhone notes section, I was able to date and stamp my pretty much every single thing that I was doing. So I'd be walking along, and I'd get my phone out and I'd make a note just to reassure myself that I hadn't done anything. And at that stage in my life, I really didn't know how I could go on, and this had gone on for many years, and I had absolutely everything, but I felt like absolutely nothing. I remember having to get to London to see a friend, and I'd just got into a relationship, the one I'm in now, and my friend at the time was pretty much the only person who understood me, because I was always scared of telling people. And this is one of the most frightening memories I have, because I was on the train, and I was making note after note. My phone was absolutely rammed. It was silly things too, just like the woman selling the crisps and the sandwiches walking past. I physically couldn't even look at them, and my cap would be over my eyes, and still to this day I wear a cap, and it's almost like my safe thing, but back then I had to have it right over my eyes so I physically couldn't see anything. And I remember getting to St Pancras, and I remember walking through the train station, and I hit the floor. I couldn't cope with the anxiety, and I just felt like I couldn't go on, and I sat on the floor for about an hour, and with my hands in my head, and I was crying, and I didn't know who to turn to or what to do, but I somehow managed to bring myself together, and I got up, and an hour later I was on the move again, and I managed to make it to my friend's house. But that for me was the turning point. I realised then that this couldn't go on, and I needed to do more. I needed to get help. So 6 years ago is when I met my partner, and I said to her kind of straight away, look, honestly, you don't want anything to do with me. I'm absolutely crackers. And but after about a month's time, she said she's going to take a chance, and it's something that I'm truly grateful for, because this really was a new beginning for me. It was a chance to kind of start again. It was a chance to rebuild, and she was so supportive, and she has literally helped me every step of the way to becoming a better person. And unlike previous relationships where I wasn't able to talk about these things, she wanted to listen to me from the start, and she wanted to learn about what I was thinking and how I was feeling, and do all that she could to get me to where I am today. And we tried absolutely everything. We went on to spend absolutely thousands of pounds on all sorts of therapy, hypnotherapy, acupuncture. We tried absolutely everything, and although at times it was making it slightly easier, I was still in the same position. I was still going back to square one, and I still really couldn't physically live a normal life. And it wasn't until June 2017 when my whole life kind of changed. I'd been at work, and I was struggling so bad that I physically couldn't even see what I was doing. Like, I couldn't even see the screen. And my manager at the time came up behind me, and he put his hand on my shoulder, and he just said, look, you're really struggling, aren't you? And I said, look, I physically cannot see. I can't see what I'm doing. I can't see past the thoughts, and I really don't know how I can go on like this. And this is when things really started to change. He took me to a side and into a room, and he told me that they wanted to support me, as the business wanted to support me and help me. And he said, look, take a couple of months off, and the company will pay you, and we will support you every step of the way. And I remember going home that day feeling really ill, really struggling with anxiety, and my thoughts had taken total control of my mind, almost hijacked it. And I woke up the following morning, and it was absolutely roasting outside, but I'd been lying in bed for probably around 4 hours, and with my eyes shut. And that was quite common for me, because I really struggled to face the day. I just couldn't get up in the mornings. Every day was a battle, and as soon as I opened my eyes, I knew I had to do it all again, and I physically couldn't cope. But something changed that day, because I felt all of a sudden I had this support from Sky Bet, and on top of all the support I had around me from my family and my close friends, I just thought, now's the time. I've got to do something, because if I don't, then it's never going to get any better. And I don't to this day know why I did this, but I went into my wardrobe, and I pulled out a pair of old gym shorts, a gym t-shirt, and a pair of old gym shoes, and I just left the house. And after about 100 meters walking down the road, I started to run. And to this day, I honestly believe that the decision I made that day was well, I'd say it saved my life, because after about 40 minutes or so, I'd probably covered around maybe 5 kilometers, walking and running, and I was just hit with this feeling, and it's a feeling like I've never felt before. It was almost like a moment's respite from the thoughts and the way I was feeling, and it was, for that moment, everything just felt like it was okay. I was basically using running as therapy to manage my mind, and don't get me wrong, some days it maybe lasted 5 or 10 minutes. But you know, the further I ran, I realised the more time I was getting away from these thoughts, and the more kind of space I was creating in my mind to actually think clearly, which is something I hadn't done for such a long time. So it was in August 2017, which was probably around about a month and a half after I'd been signed off long-term sick, and I just had this idea that I wanted to try and find a way to connect with more people who were struggling. And I created Run For Your Mind, which was a mental health support page. And I really wanted to do this to kind of break out my shell and put my message out there and try and be more open about my struggles, in the hope to support, motivate and inspire other people who are fighting similar battles. I was adding blog posts and pictures and videos with drone footage to my Instagram, and just putting either quotes with it or little snippets of how I was feeling, and just being brutally honest about how I was feeling, and just talking openly about OCD and how it was affecting me. And all of a sudden I'd created this community of maybe, you know, a couple of hundred people who I was speaking to on a regular basis, and it was very much the making of me, because not only was I able to help other people, this was in turn massively helping me better understand what I was going through, and I was just learning more and more about mental health. And the community's just grown and grown, and it's just been an absolute blessing for me, really. So in September 2017, which was will have been around 2.5 months after I was signed off, I was back in work, and I was in a much better headspace. And a couple of weeks after that, I completed my first race, which was the Bristol Half Marathon. And I went over to run that with my cousin, and it was just incredible, you know, completing that first race after being pretty much written off 3 months before. And then a year to the date from the Bristol Half, I completed my first 100-kilometre run. And by this stage, I was starting to really piece my life back together. And all of a sudden, thanks to running, I was rebuilding my life slowly and gradually. And I was putting myself back in these positions that I wouldn't have even dreamt of doing a year before that. So I kept running and I kept talking, and I was handed the opportunity to deliver a talk at the Gathering for one of the Works event. And it was the year that it was on the set of Victoria, and they were doing a feature for people's untold stories throughout Sky Betting and Gaming, and they gave me the opportunity to talk about my mental health and my journey in front of a live audience. And that was pretty much my first public speaking, or my first taste of public speaking. And there I was, sat on Victoria's bed, delivering a talk to a couple of hundred people about everything that I'd been through. And work seemed to really love what I did, and my manager approached me afterwards and said, is there any way really we can support you with this and kind of give you the platform and the help needed to get to where you want to be, and maybe do more talks throughout the business and out of the business. And they basically, through the development fund, paid for me to go on a speaking course, and it was absolutely invaluable, really. I mean, it was incredible, and I really learned a lot from that. And so from there, for me, it was all about learning to become comfortable feeling uncomfortable. And I read this once, and that has literally been my motto for life now. And every time someone asks me to do something that I'd love to have done, but my mind's telling me I can't, I just do it now. That is my mindset, and that just applies to everything. So if someone says to me now,
you fancy going for a beer? My mind's telling me, absolutely not. You don't want to go for a beer because you know how it's going to fuel your anxiety. But I'm just telling myself, yes, I'm going. And that is exactly what I do now for everything. I put myself back in a position that maybe I don't want to be in, but at that time, but I know that's what I'd want to do. Truthfully, without the support from Sky Betting and Gaming over the past 4 years, it does really scare me to think where I'd be. From incorporating run breaks mid-shifts, chats and coffees with management and runs with directors, they've stood by me and believed in me every single step of the way. They've encouraged me to think clearer and dream bigger, backing my plans with Run for Your Mind with no real personal gain, just for the love of what I'm trying to achieve. I honestly don't think I'd be working now if it wasn't for SBG. So, if you're struggling yourself and you're worried about speaking out, don't be. You're in the safest hands.